police officers. I certainly do. But if one police officer does wrong and another police officer knows of the wrongdoing, he's wrong too. And until we get folk to really understand that, we can put policies in place, we can put resolutions in place, but folk have to get it. They have to get it. I got it. And while I may not be on the same page as some of you all, you say I don't, but I do. I'm black. I'm a female. I have a black stepson. I understand I have a black daughter. I know what it's like to be followed in a store. I know how it feels. So I do understand. So when I say to this police department that there are issues and concerns, it's not only because I speak as an elected official, I speak as a person who's personally experienced some bias. And those biases that we can address as best we can by policy, but folk have to really get it. So training, sensitivity training, all of that needs to be taken into consideration when we talk about having a police department. And while I digress, I'm sorry, because I have about 4 or 5 sets of pages of questions here, because the more I hear, the more I want to hear. I'm not hearing. I want us to create this zero tolerance policy that I've talked to you about. And one of the things I talked to Tom about was creating this policy where excessive force triggers a review, an investigation, and a notification to council.
Can I ask a question?
And that should
related to that?
Yeah, no problem.
Is it true when a use of force is done that it has to be reported?
Yes, ma'am.
So couldn't that trigger what Mrs. Hightower is asking for?
Yes, we just have to work through the policy about the notification, but yes. Every use of force is reported and every use of force is investigated.
Well, I understand there's an excessive use of force form to be completed. There is a form called excessive use form.
Right, which is what I'm speaking to.
But I want it to trigger automatically. When you get that form, that use of force form should automatically trigger a review. There should never be a 45-day lag time from the incident until the date that Officer Cole was put on administrative leave, and that was on 8/10. We've addressed with pay. I'm concerned about that too. I don't think we should pay people for bad behavior. I certainly agree. So what I would like for us to do is I want that force to trigger a review, an investigation, and a notification for council. And I'd like for it to take place immediately upon when the form is submitted. Because we need to start getting on the proactive end of things and not the reactive end of things. Today we are just reacting. And that's why some members of council and I met last week on Thursday. We met on Friday. We've been talking about it. We agree, we disagree. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not taking this lightly. I also want that investigation to take place within 30 days, to be completed within the body of 30 days. Right now, I think it's 45. That's too long. Because the quicker we get hold of this, the quicker we can resolve it. Not knowing is a problem for me. You're welcome.
Chief Scott, may I?
Excuse me, let's let them exit, please.
Okay. I'm going to the bathroom. I'm going to wait till they leave.
Mine will be very brief, and he said, okay.
Let them exit, please.
Okay.
No, what I would like to direct staff, and I'm sorry, but if you speak from the floor, not everybody can hear you, and the people at home can't, so, excuse me. I would like to direct the city staff to look at all of the questions that were asked during the meeting, including speakers from the floor and those on the dais, and report back to us by Friday, if possible.
Be glad to.
Chief Scott.
Okay.
Okay. Chief Scott.
Excuse me. Mrs. Hightower, are you through? You're through.
Approximately, how many use of force cases would you have in a year? Won't hold you to it, ballpark. How many cases do you think you have that include use of force?
At any different levels, it's going to be in excess of 200.
200?
Yes, sir.
So it's about, okay, every day and a half. Thank you.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to stop so we can finish this meeting. I said that staff will answer these questions by Friday. I'm not going to argue with you.
Okay, I don't know if Chief Hinson can answer a question right now, but I got all your hold on, ladies. Hold on.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to stop.
Hold on, April. Y'all hang on.
Sharon, we need to move on. Are you through with your questions?
If he's willing to speak, because they're not going to move till he's willing to speak.
Mr. Outling, did you have another question?
I do have several remarks, and if I can make them, I'd love to do so. You know, I think when I saw the video last week...
Not you.
When I saw the video last week, it really upset me. And then I found myself, as the week progressed, I got more and more upset. And I think the sad reality is that too many people in our country can personally relate to that experience. And even myself, my family lived in Buffalo, New York. We were in the inner city, then moved to a more moderately income neighborhood. And after being there for several years, someone alleged that my father was breaking into his own house and he had an unwanted experience with the police. Fortunately for my father, it didn't end like this video, but it's something that I think many persons can relate to personally. And to be quite frank, it doesn't change when you get elected on the city council. It doesn't change if you become an attorney. It's an experience that far too many people in our community have experienced. I think here, what's particularly upsetting is that anytime an officer or member of city staff clearly acts outside of their employment, clearly violates the high standards that we as a city set for that person, as I know the police department sets for the person, it's not only an offense on the victim, it's not only a harm on the victim, it's really a harm and offense on the police department and the vast, vast majority of persons who want to do their job well and really risk their lives for the community's benefit every single day. Further, it's an offense to our entire community, and we all suffer as a result of it. And I think the reality is these are issues that have been with the city of Greensboro, every single city across the country for decades, 4 decades. It did not start with this city council. It did not start with this police chief. It did not start with this professional staff. But the positive thing in this is, as a city, we have been committed to fixing this and getting this right. Institutions, the reality are institutions are not built in a day. They will not be reformed in a day. I would love to tell everyone that they will, but the reality is that they will not. But the reality is also that we have been laying the groundwork in a very diligent, proactive way for a very, very long time. There have been very active members of the community who have really brought these issues to the forefront, for which they deserve credit. There are members in the community who meet on a constant basis to discuss these issues, inclusive of the mayor and many of the speakers who came before City Council today. And also, this police department has undertaken step after step after step the past year and a half and really been leaders on this topic. And there has been no other police department in this state, and immodestly, there have been no other city council in this state that have been more proactive on this issue. As I think about what's been done in the past year and a half, it's nothing short of remarkable, right? You have a police department, a police chief, who's supportive of any release of body-worn camera footage. You look across the street, you talk about the sheriff and the sheriff's association, they don't want any disclosure. You have a chief here who supports it, where you can have constructive dialogue on this topic. You look at bias-based police, right? Our chief has come out very strongly against it. For many years, he has trained officers, and the police department has trained officers against it. We are still in a handful of the entire state that addresses it at all. At all. We train other cities on how to address these issues. Earlier this week, our police department, with the leadership from this city council, took an action to prohibit racial profiling and other profiling and bias-based policing that is allowed elsewhere. If you go down the road, if you go to Winston-Salem, other municipalities, Charlotte, that conduct may be allowed. So I think it's disingenuous and inaccurate and not helpful to analyzing the problem so that you can solve the problem by judging the true status of events where we are now. To be clear, there are many issues on which we can improve. There are many issues on which we can improve and do better. But the question is, are we committed to doing better? And the answer, I think, is yes. What reflects that? I think it's the action here today. You've had an increase over the past year in terms of police transparency, addressing bias in policing. And this action today, this resolution today, is unprecedented on the topic of police accountability. I know of no other municipality who has acted affirmatively as a city council body to revoke the certification such that when you talk about bad apples, that bad apple will not be able to engage in that misconduct anywhere else in the state. When you talk about charges, I will tell you as an attorney, I agree with what everyone said. What everyone said. It's part of the reason why Tom and I had discussions on this very topic, and we're taking, to be quite frank, a legal risk by even passing the resolution. Because the reality is, if the person didn't have the authority to touch Mr. Yorsay, and he abused Mr. Yorsay, if the situation was flipped, I tend to think that person will be found guilty of assault, and the prosecutor will be interested in bringing charges. The reality is, we are, as a city body, constrained in what we can do. I would love to say that we, the 9 of us or the 8 of us, can resolve this today. We can't. But we are doing what's in our power to try to make it right. So what we're doing is we are taking it to the district attorney, asking him to receive the benefit of the collective wisdom, the things that we've identified, the things that we've seen, so that he can make his decision about whether or not to bring charges in light of the foregoing. Because really, as a community, we suffer the harm, and it's unacceptable. And anytime you look at a decision, and part of the justification for not bringing charges, not prosecuting, is the fact that the offender, here Mr. Cole, resigned. If that's the basis for not prosecuting, that's a curious circumstance. Because I'll tell you, if Mr. Wilkins, if Mr. Wilkins assaulted me, right, and he resigned, it doesn't make sense that his resignation would somehow influence whether or not he's prosecuted for assault. There was an assault or there wasn't assault, and whether or not he resigns is immaterial. So this city council, again, is proactively taking steps to address systemic issues. It has done so hand in hand with the police for over the past year, and I'm sure many years before that. And it's also addressing the instances of police misconduct. And I think with this unprecedented action, it is clear both internally to city staff as well as the police department what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. What's acceptable in terms of how these instances of misconduct are brought to city council's attention, also in terms of how they're handled. But the reality is it takes time. Institutions are not built in a day. They will not be changed in a day. And I'm confident, based off of the actions taken by this council, and this chief of police, and this police department, we were going to get it right.
Chief, any final comments?
Ma'am, I appreciate all the comments from council and from our community. I want you to know that, you know, one of our key behaviors is self-assessment. And as the chief, I will tell you that we have a ways to go. I think policing in this country does, but we do acknowledge that. So far as from the young lady's comment about Deputy Chief Hinson, I think he's in the room, and if you want to come forward, Chief, you're more than welcome. He and I work in tandem on these decisions. He is our patrol bureau commander, and I don't know if he wants to make a comment. I'm perfectly fine with that, if that's okay with you, Mayor.
Yes.
You know, this is something that our organization takes seriously, and we are proud that even though the process needs to be tightened up, and I agree with many of the comments, and I'm working toward those, ultimately we do believe that the right steps are there. We just need to bring them together in a better way.
All right. Thank you, Chief. To the mayor, the city manager, and the council, I'd like to just let you know what I did when this matter was brought to me. And I remember very clearly what I did and what I also recommended. On August the 9th, that would have been on a Tuesday, Captain Larry Thompson, he's in the back, he brought it to my attention around 10:30 that Officer Cole was involved in this incident, reviewed the video, and upon reviewing the video, it didn't take me long to make a determination of what we needed to do. I determined right then and there that he needed to be removed from the streets and not go out and serve any citizens of our great city. I also found out that he was to report back on that day, on August the 9th. He was removed from the streets on August the 9th, so he would not have an opportunity to go out and conduct himself in this behavior. I also informed the chief of police, and he concurred with that. I became aware of this on August the 9th, and I took immediate action. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments from council?
I did have a question for Deputy Chief. Deputy Chief, if you don't mind, I hear what you say, that you took action upon as soon as you knew, and certainly that commendable on your part, but, and I won't ask you your personal feelings on anything, but with the incident being on June the 17th of 2016, you're saying you found out on, or you knew of the incident on August the 9th, but prior to that, when did Captain Thompson, he told you on August the 9th as well?
Yes, ma'am. I found out everything on August the 9th.
Okay. Do you all have a chain of command, if you will, that you go through when there's a report done? Does a person turn in their report to somebody, and then somebody looks at it and turns it over to somebody else? And
yes, ma'am. We have a chain of command, and the initial investigation would have started with the corporal or the sergeant, and then it would go up the chain of command to the lieutenant, to the captain, and then it would reach me, and then I would make a decision, and it would go to the professional standards division. But the way I operate, and the chief said it earlier, I'm not going to know something and not let him know what's going on. So on that date, that's the date that I was informed, and that's the date that I informed Chief Scott, and we removed him from the streets on that day.
So my concern is, I guess, is if you turn in a report of excessive use of force, and everybody now has a body-worn camera, and that's the reason I voted for that, for everybody to get a body-worn camera on duty and off duty. If you got that report, would somebody not have looked at that footage prior to you getting it as they wrote the report and then turned in the report? Whomever they turned it into, should not that person have looked at the report? Does anybody see that video right then to make sure they're clear? Do they compare officers' statements with the video to make sure things match up? I mean, and I have so many questions, I don't even really know where to start, but I'm starting here because I hear what you say.
Yes, ma'am.
And that's very disturbing to me because on August the 9th, it's when you took action, so Officer Cole was allowed to continue to work from June 17th to August the 9th in the street.
Yes, ma'am.
And potentially another incident could have occurred because this is the second time that an incident has occurred. He's not the first time in, so he's had an encounter on the second time. Maybe my question should be, are you not more diligent about officers when they've had a second occurrence of something?
I will say this. We need to be more diligent in any use of force that occurs. If a use of force occurs, we need to take the necessary steps, look into it, peel back the onion, so to speak. There were some people that had opportunity to look at this, but again, by the time it got to me, it was on August the 9th. I didn't know anything to then. I'm not passing the buck because I'm not that way, but I believe that Chief Scott stated earlier we were going to go back and look at this process so we could kind of redefine it, so to speak, because the timeline was too long. He realizes that, I realize that. We can't change that. But what we have to do is find ways to make sure that this timeline does not happen again. And I believe that we'll definitely put the necessary steps in place to make sure that it doesn't happen again. But again, when I saw the video, I knew immediately that the actions were wrong and we needed to take immediate action. And so I did that, and I brought that to Chief Scott's attention because Chief Scott didn't know either. And once I briefed him, he was removed from the streets.
Well, I can't thank you very much
Okay.
for explaining, but I guess I'm just, maybe I'm not going to solve this in my brain today at all, but when we saw the video, I think in a matter of seconds, we as a body were saying, oh my, we were in disbelief. As Jamal has said, he was sickened, I was sickened, disheartened, if you will, disappointed, disgusted, all those things that, actions you want to describe, and basically just in simple disbelief that this particular person was a training officer, and I think you demoted him from the first incident, but nevertheless, a type of person who could have had some leadership in the department for some other officers to look to, made very poor judgment, did not know how to de-escalate a situation, and instead escalated it even further. And it concerns me that nobody saw this video. So did it go to criminal investigation? Did it go to the criminal investigation department? I mean, you're doing two, and I want the public to be clear, there's two hearings. There's an administrative hearing and investigation and a criminal investigation,
Yes,
correct?
ma'am.
So when the criminal investigation took place, it took place after you knew about it, or was the criminal investigation
Yes, ma'am.
prior to you knowing about it?
Well, no, ma'am. When I found out on August the 9th, I then again made contact with Chief Scott. He concurred totally with my recommendation to remove him from the streets. And then at that point in time, Chief Scott knew that he needed to continue this process. And once he was taken off the street, a criminal investigation was launched. And once we complete that, then the administrative investigation would then follow once the criminal investigation had concluded. But of course, during this time, Officer Cole elected to resign. And unfortunately, we could not keep him from resigning. I understand that there are concerns around that, but the gentleman, he resigned. But we continued on with the process, and we sustained all of the charges that were as a result of the investigation.
Okay, so with two hearings going on, not going on till after you found out, looking at the timeline, it says Mr. Yorsay called in himself on 7/20. So from 6/17 to 7/20, nothing. From 7/20 to 8/9, nothing. Did anything happen when Mr. Yorsay called in and said whatever he said? I don't know what he said, but I'm just assuming that he called in with a complaint. Who got that complaint?
I will let Chief Scott speak to that.
So, ma'am, maybe I can help a little bit.
Because it's not clear in this timeline.
Let me back up for a second. part of what the chain of command review is really a fact-finding mission. And then that goes through the chain to the commanding officer of the division. Either the commanding officer, if it's a justified use of force, the commanding officer of the division would then rule on it, and then the deputy chief would concur. So up into that point, officers did see that video. But it's fair that you understand that there is a number of questions that have to be asked when law enforcement uses force. Was the detention legal? Was the attempted seizure of the phone legal? There's a series of questions that have to occur, as well as statements from everybody who's involved in that kind of thing. It's not quite as clear, and we're no different than any other law enforcement agency. It's not as clear as, let me look at this and assess it that quickly. It has to be a number of legal questions that are involved that have to be answered.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to stop. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to. She has spoken. We are moving on with the council meeting. I'm going to have to ask you to sit down. I'm going to. We will respond to questions by Friday. I'm going to have to ask you to sit down. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for me? Councilperson Hightower, any other questions? Okay.
Well, I mean, the questions just keep mounting, and I'm not going to be here all day. So
Sharon,
I don't want to be
Sharon,
here all
would
day,
you be able to
Okay,
put
thank
some
you.
questions in writing and relay them to the city manager?
Well, I put several in writing, and the timeline is just what concerns me, because now I hear that other officers seen it. So what my question would be, because I think it all relates to the policy I want to see put into effect, is that perhaps body-worn camera footage video should be reviewed by the chief, initial review by the chief when there is a report of excessive force. If it's going through the chain, and then you're the last to know as well, or the deputy chief's the last to know, I see a problem with that.
Well, and if I may, ma'am, one of the things, and you mentioned a couple of things that I want to talk about a review. Up until this point, and actually until we get one-for-one cameras, currently we don't have that. So we hope to, by Thanksgiving, end of the year, we'll have that entire complement of cameras deployed, so that we will, in a good faith method, know that just about every one of these should be on video. Currently, that's not the case, as you know, because our cameras. That I want to institute a 48-hour review for video. Now, it's clear, and I have to say this, video doesn't always have the answer. It can be one perspective. We've seen that play out on a national picture in the last week more than anybody's wanted to. But at least to create another mechanism by which we can shorten that timeline. And I believe that's our opportunity to do it. So I do hear what you're saying. I see your perspective. Unfortunately, what happened is many people saw bits and pieces of this investigation, and until it comes together at the captain level, it's not ruled upon. This is a case where I think we need to do better. I've said that openly. But as we begin to have that one-for-one for cameras, I believe we'll have that better opportunity to focus on the investigations and shorten the timelines. And that's my obligation to you, that we're going to do that.
Thank you. Any other questions, brief? Okay, I have a move to adjourn by Mrs. Johnson, seconded by Mr. Wilkins. All in favor, say aye. 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 Opposed? That passes 8-0. Thank you.
Oh, to the USA family, I do have a note. I want it from yours. Councilman Fox did want me to make an apology to you all as well, since he lost his signal on his phone.